Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today's special guest is Ezra Auerbach. He's kind of famous. He was running NABCEP for quite a while. He's been in the solar industry longer than anyone listening, probably. And welcome to the show, Ezra. Maybe you can even give yourself a little bit of an introduction. I know 30 plus years in the industry.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. This is going to be fun. I'm not used to doing these, so I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes.
I'm sure you'll do great.
I have been in the industry for about 36 years, and I come to it honestly, as it were. I've lived off grid, I can say, most of my life,
Wow.
certainly for more than 55 years,
Wow.
and most of it on a small remote island in British Columbia. So, an off-grid career with candles and kerosene.
I'm really interested in how that went and how it evolved to solar and everything.
Well, our first electrical system was to run a light bulb and a tape cassette. Like Jeff Spees says, it was all about listening to the Grateful Dead.
I've been to quite a few of those shows myself. Actually, I just saw them at the Sphere, or what's left of them.
Not much left. And so our first electrical system, we charged it with 2 car batteries in a truck that was parked on a hill. When the car battery went dead, you put it in the truck and you pushed it down the hill to get it started. Good old standard transmissions. So when solar started a little head around our community in the mid 80s, it was a no-brainer to get interested in it. I ended up with my partners starting a business. I credited it to Real Goods. In those days, Real Goods replaced Mother Earth News as outhouse reading, and looked at it and came up one day and said to my wife, how hard could it be to start a solar business? Let's do it.
Great.
And Energy Alternatives was born from there. And
so that was your company, Energy Alternatives?
Yep, we started a business fairly similar to Real Goods, Catalog, or AEE.
What year was that?
That would have been 1986.
Wow.
And we mail ordered solar and batteries, windmills, and micro hydro all over Canada, to the way north, to the far east part of the country. And it was a heck of a lot of fun.
So is a lot of that like those Arco solar modules, or were those even available yet?
Modules we sold were Arcos. We sold Kyoceras. We sold Hoxans. We settled on Kyoceras for a number of years because we dealt with Photocom. They were a really good wholesaler for us back in the day. We sold the company in 95 or 96. And after that, I started working in industry. Started my industry career at venerable old Trace Engineering.
Yeah.
And I started to understand some of the larger challenges in our industry on the not technical side. There were an awful lot of people out there that didn't have a clue what they were doing. They were selling equipment to people, they couldn't support it, they couldn't install it right. And it coincided with the availability of government grants. All of a sudden, people that weren't passionate about solar, but who were passionate about making a buck, jumped into the industry with both feet. It was a lot like the 70s during the Jimmy Carter era, when he brought in really big subsidies for solar thermal. It broke that industry. Everybody with a pipe wrench and some copper pipe went out and sold solar thermal. And to no one's surprise, a lot of it didn't work, and worse yet, a lot of them leaked into buildings.
Yeah, I'd hear a lot of them were leaking when it wasn't raining just because they're pumping water through them. And then it goes in through the roof. So they're nailing 2x4s into the shingles or something.
Exactly. And with the exception of leaders like Ed Murray and Bill Guiney, a lot of that industry just broke. Even in the 90s, when I started talking to people at trade shows about solar electricity, the first thing they said is, solar doesn't work. I know it. I know it from the 70s. Solar doesn't work. You'd scratch your head and go, you've never put a garden hose in the sunshine? Yes, solar works. Certainly solar thermal works really well. And then you pivot to talking about the magic of solar electricity. But circling back to what we saw that bad quality installs and unrealistic sales promises were threatening the solar electric industry, which was just starting to bloom, with the same outcome as what happened in the solar thermal industry. And a bunch of people in the industry got together, coalesced from a wide group of stakeholders, and went, we have to do something about that. We worked with industry, with labor, with government, policymakers, installers. And from that, the notion of NABCEP was born. And it was a very simple notion. We needed to have a way to distinguish committed, trained, and tested professionals so that consumers could have some faith in getting systems that were going to work, were installed properly, and were going to perform as promised and expected.
So were you there at the birth of NABCEP?
Yeah, I'm one of the founders. I'm one of the co-founders of it.
And so what year was that? I know I've talked to Ward Bauer about that before. And is it like the late 90s?
I think we started talking as a group in 99 and officially formed NABCEP in 2000. And yeah, working with Ward from that time on has been one of the greater privileges in my industry, in my career. He's such a rock star of knowledge and competence and commitment,
And a nice guy.
and a nice guy to boot.
Yeah, and another thing too is just in case anybody's listening, NABCEP stands for North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners, and that's the ultimate certification for solar and now storage. And I must think that at some point maybe they should change it to encompass more than North America.
Well, it's called North America because of the Canadian me. It was going to be ABCEP, the American Board of, and I wouldn't go for that because I was the Canadian in the room. So we made it NABCEP.
And then also North America, I think geographically includes Mexico. And I have heard rumors of there being a Spanish associate exam in the works, maybe something like that. And in fact, my associate classes now, I'm translating them into Spanish.
That's great.
I shouldn't say I am. I'm not that good. Poquito.
Poquito, sí, solamente. There are in Mexican, there's actually certificates from all around the world now. It's gaining respect and reputation everywhere. And people that want to show that they're different become certified. Fortunately, it hasn't solved. You can find ads all the time for salespeople. Make a gazillion dollars. All you got to do is flog solar systems that don't work to little old ladies on their doorstep and run like hell.
Yeah, I've read some articles that are, I'm sure, are scaring a lot of people away from the industry.
And it's really critical we address that. Especially now, we're not just looking at solar electricity, we're looking at energy storage, which is vastly more complicated than just putting in a grid tie solar system. And we do face an ongoing challenge. And how our industry responds to that challenge will make the difference between the survival of residential solar and its demise. So it's a pretty serious issue for us. What are you seeing out there? I know you do a lot of training, a heck of a lot of training, and have helped a lot of people get their associate, which is a stepping stone for moving around in the industry. So what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's a ton of good intentioned people that are doing the right thing and everything, but then there's some people that are not doing the right thing. And I've even been hired by some of them. I remember this was a number of years ago, and there was a couple of guys in Laguna Beach, and they were generating leads and selling leads. And they hired me to come down there and do some training. I was like, oh, I'm going to educate these guys. And it was upsetting to see what they were doing. And they're just like, driving around yelling at people to sell more and essentially just like lying to people and all that kind of stuff. And so eventually, of course, it didn't work out for me doing training for them. In fact, I had to fight to even get paid from what they owed me. And there's all the people at NABCEP and all the people that are NABCEP certified. It seems like a really good group, and we're kind of like family. And then there's this whole other world that we don't really see. I know there's like a convention. I was kind of surprised because I don't know any of the people. The SolarCon, have you heard of that one?
I have.
I guess they meet in Utah, and I'm sure there's good people there. And I know Enphase goes there and stuff like that. But I was just kind of surprised to see that there's this whole other world that I don't know about. And so I'm trying to figure out the solution to myself. Right now, I'm the president of NorCal Solar, which is an ASIS chapter, American Solar Energy Society chapter, and trying to figure out how to transition from being like an organization that just educates people about solar, where everybody already knows about it now. Like they're doing solar home tours and going, what is solar? What would it be like? And now everybody's neighbor has solar. So it needs to be a transition. It's sort of like there's not even that much interest in what we're doing, or everybody's too busy in the industry to go and join the organization. So I was trying to even think of a way to transition NorCal Solar into helping people find the right installer.
Well, getting back to what you said about NorCal Solar and the industry in general, what I've seen is that we have done a great job as an industry raising the quality of installation in general and the knowledge base of the installers. NABCEP certifications have made a difference. Perhaps an even bigger difference is NABCEP's continuing education credit programs. All the manufacturers, all the major distributors have stepped up and offer trainings online and in person that supply the participants with CE credits. And your presentations are required to be more than sales pitches. There has to be some technical content. So people are learning. They're learning how the equipment can be programmed, installation tricks, learning how to support it. And so installers are getting better. Not all of them, but it doesn't matter how good the install is if the sale was crappy. An installer cannot fix misinformed expectations, cannot fix overstated promises of performance, cannot fix bad deals for the consumer. That's the salesperson's job. And an underrated part of NABCEP's certification portfolio is PV technical sales. And I think we both teach it.
Yep.
I do. I have a PV tech sort. Yep.
Yeah, so anybody who wants to take the exam, you have to take both of our classes.
Oh no, that's not true. Either of our classes. You don't have to take both of them.
Oh,
That
sure.
was a good try, but
Why not?
no, it's just one of them.
I'm just recommending it. So,
Yeah. So we need to help consumers know what to ask. And I see New York Times, I see Wirecutter, I see CNET starting to publish good articles, 10 questions to ask a solar installer, 15 questions to ask a solar installer. What we need, I think, is our industry organization, our good solar installers, our good solar companies, and our committed distributors and our state programs to get together and produce consistent consumer information. And it can be as little and simple as these are the questions you should ask.
yeah, I mean, it sounds like a great idea. Yeah.
So, how do you think we can make it happen?
Gosh, it's really difficult because there's these people that are invested in making $1 million a year doing solar sales, whatever it takes. It's just hard to be able to separate those things out. What my solution is really is if somebody asks me, who should I buy solar from? I say, go to the NABCEP website and look for someone there that's NABCEP certified to sell it to you. And then that will work because it is different in different places. And it gets to be really confusing for people too, with all these changes and different rate schedules. And we have different versions of net metering and non-exporting and time of use. And some residential customers even have demand charges. And it's hard to coordinate all the different places and how that works. And the most important, I think, is just to have somebody that's selling the solar that understands it.
I agree.
Please excuse the sound quality for the beginning of this podcast. Ezra did change mics not too far from the beginning, and it sounds much better. But he is on an island, which is pretty cool, transmitting with his Starlink off-grid. Yeah, another thing too about the NABCEP certifications is if somebody that's certified doesn't do the right thing, they can lose their certification.
Yep, that's true.
And you have to vow to do the right thing ethically when you take any of these NABCEP exams. And even if they have a different NABCEP certification, it's still, I think, a good thing. It's a lot better than somebody that is just good at selling. One of the things that I have, electrical and solar contractors licenses in California, and I'm not actively using them, but I get so many emails, LinkedIn's, phone calls about people trying to sell qualified leads and all these different things. It's kind of overwhelming.
It is. And I see some states that are starting to try to respond. There's a bill that's being put forward by the State Solar Energy Association, and some progressive legislators in North Carolina that is basically saying the company that sells the job has to be the same company that installs it. And that takes away those lead generators that go do the sales organization stuff. They got a lead, they go sell it, they close the sale, and then they sell that closed sale to an installation company. We get into trouble there. We get into trouble because when the system doesn't work as expected, who's the customer going to point at? How are they going to get satisfaction? If they talk to the installer, it's not their fault.
Yeah, and I wonder if it sometimes gets difficult for some of those organizations because they're partially funded by companies that might be doing some of these things, like selling residential solar, and they don't want anybody to tell them how to do it. There's lots of conflict of interest in every industry, I guess.
It is, and it's true. When you have an industry association, their knee-jerk response is to protect their members, their stakeholders.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Shaun White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Shaun White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Shaun White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. So we've just changed microphones with Ezra, and he sounds much clearer. So where were we, Ezra?
We're talking about who's responsible and who can take action to improve the sales process and ensure that consumers are well educated. And there's a lot of approaches, but we were focusing on the industry association. And we're talking about the potential conflict of interest between an association whose membership are the businesses that sometimes are creating some of the issues, and a longer term view of the organization's mandate, which is to help grow and protect their industry. And we pivoted to the notion that in order to be a certified installer or any sort of certificate at an organization like NABCEP, there's a code of ethics you need to sign and adhere to. And that's the foundation of how the disciplinary process at NABCEP occurs. Did the behavior, was it consistent with the code of ethics? And I think that perhaps we want to have that as part of our industry associations. Yeah, we'd love you to join, but joining this means you're joining something for a higher purpose than just your business. You're joining it for the industry your business participates in.
Yeah, which in the long run is probably good for their business.
Ultimately, a rising tide raises all ships. That's correct.
Yeah.
And a falling tide puts everybody on the beach.
Yeah, it'd be like a race for the bottom if you can temporarily make more money by not doing the right thing.
That's true. And it is difficult for organizations and stakeholders to grasp that you change hats when you walk into different rooms. But we see it, when you're out in the world and you've got two manufacturers competing against each other, it can be fierce. It can be gloves off. But when those manufacturers walk into a trade association boardroom, they have to leave that behind because now they're working for a common cause, and that common cause is their industry. What we need to do is ensure that part of that common cause becomes consumer protection and consumer education.
Yeah, definitely.
So having said that, it's probably worthwhile to segue to some of the really good stuff that's out there that's really helping the quality of work and proposal. We see programs like Aurora, Open Source Solar, Scanifly, really raising the bar on the quality of information the consumer receives. And I applaud that. It's great to work with those programs. Scanifly, you don't have to be climbing up on a roof with a solar pathfinder looking for seasonal shade. With LiDAR, we get to look at the actual resource available resource of every single roof plane, and we're able to show that to the consumer.
Yeah, so let's just mention that Scanify uses drones to do site surveys and things, and it's really neat. The drone flies over, does a pattern, gets a 3D image, can tell everything about shading. And we even have some free Scanify classes on HeatSpring. I'm actually part of one of those. And then you were saying LiDAR, that stands for light detection and ranging. And that's actually using lasers. They fly over with a smaller airplane and they shoot lasers and they get the reflection of the laser and they calculate with GPS and the speed of light 3D images, which is pretty amazing. You can't really get it out in rural areas, but in the urban areas, there's a lot of that. So that's pretty neat. And another thing that kind of reminds me of LiDAR is yesterday and before, but like yesterday, I was with Bill Brooks. We went sailing and we were driving around in San Francisco and there was these Waymo cars. And that's what they have is LiDAR. And I've seen quite a few cars now that have no drivers and no passengers. It's kind of like a ghost car. It's kind of strange.
Yeah, it's scary as hell.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was wondering, like, whoa, could somebody hack that? And I don't know if you remember, like, when I was a kid, there's a movie called Christine, where it's like this haunted car that goes around with nobody in it. And I actually used to go with somebody named Christine, so we made a lot of jokes about that. And yeah, it's kind of weird just seeing these driverless cars. And I'm kind of wondering too if there's 7 people sitting at a desk with like PlayStation controllers actually controlling those things or backup or something like that. But they're like driving around San Francisco and Phoenix and Austin and some other cities with nobody there. But that's the LiDAR technology. And that's what they're using from airplanes, and they shoot lasers and they get the reflection and they can tell how high the tree is compared to your roof and get 3D images. And pretty amazing what can be done with software, especially compared to the good old Solar Pathfinder or the Solmetric.
Well, that's true. You get to see all that stuff. But if I was doing consumer education, I actually want the person to show up at my place and look at it. Because Scanify or Aurora, any of those programs, they don't have a good look at the roof. They don't have a good look at the condition of the service panel. And they don't even have a good look at the landscaping. If you have some local knowledge, you can see that, oh yeah, that's not a shade tree now, but holy cow, it's a cottonwood and it's going to be 30 feet tall in 5 years. So site visits and really understanding what's on the site, what the challenges of the site are an important part of making realistic sales proposals and ensuring that the production will be as expected.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to me how sometimes people sell solar systems online and nobody ever shows up until they're ready to install. Crazy.
And all of those proposals have a lot of CYA language in them. This proposal is subject to change upon arriving at the site. I mean, goodness gracious, how would it be to sign a contract for a solar install and the day they show up for them to come and say, oh, by the way, you need to re-roof your house?
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen some of these things like on the Reddit solar. I follow that one and look at a lot of this stuff. And there's people that make a deposit for a solar system and they're like starting to install it. They've already made some holes in the roof and everything. And then they're like, oh, it's going to be an extra $5,000. And they're like, what? And it's like they should be able to change their mind before they're telling them it's going to be another $5,000 and things like that. It just doesn't sound right to me.
Well, that's because it isn't right. I mean, certainly there needs to be room for the installation company when they start working on the site to discover there's obstacles or challenges that, despite their best efforts, they were not able to detect.
Yeah, like if I'm installing something, like I've done it before and had people working for me and installing systems with my contractor's license, and every time they're going to miss something. But that's why you leave a margin in there and you catch it. And some jobs you make more money than other jobs. Some jobs you even lose some money, and that's part of doing business. But you shouldn't be trying to sneak on an extra $5,000 or whatever it is after you've already taken the job. That's why you have a site survey.
Yeah, that's true. But sometimes you have to open up a wall for a panel upgrade. And you find out that the whole thing's hanging by a thread because all of the framing material nearby is dry rot. Those are the sorts of things that you need to let a consumer know that there's risk.
Yeah, as long as they know for sure, and it's not hidden behind a whole bunch of fine print on some online agreement that probably nobody reads because it's 100 pages long or, something like that.
Yes, that 100 pages long. It's like what I said about the California consumer information. It's wonderful, but we live in an era when reading more than a sound bite is difficult for people. I mean, good gracious, public policy is announced in tweets instead of press conferences. So having 16 pages of consumer information, it's lovely but irrelevant. It needs to be condensed to a page. If you can't read it on a single screen without scrolling, it's likely not going to get read anymore.
Yep.
So we need to cut to the chase on all of that stuff and have consistent, simple, clear language about what to expect, about what to ask, about what the outcome might be of surprises, and what the responsibility of the contractor is with respect to those surprises.
Yeah, and other things too are just kind of common sense for consumers that I always recommend people to do is to check people out on their licensing board. In California, it's the Contractor State Licensing Board. And they actually have something that's kind of funny almost, or can make jokes about it. It's like most wanted list, and they have people's faces, and there's like people out there, and it's not just for solar, it's any kind of contracting, building houses or whatever. And so you can look people up with any kind of license, doctors, lawyers, you can look up and see what kind of complaints they've had. And then you can go on the Google, the Yelp, and the Better Business Bureau. I know that there's this one person that I'm familiar with, and he's a nice guy and a good installer and a terrible business person. And he has the worst Better Business Bureau rating I ever saw. And so you just have to look that way for people too. And then, of course, as I said before, NABCEP certified, somebody at the company, NABCEP certified at least, and talk to that person. And those are some good things that everybody should do. And especially just like the Yelp and the Google and all that for anything you're buying, even if it's not solar.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We keep talking about the importance, which is clearly true, of education, of consumer protection. What we haven't touched on is how much fun the next era of solar is going to be. We're moving into places where the lines between off-grid and on-grid are blurred by dynamic hybrid systems. We're moving into new territory of self-consumption, where people are basically off-grid with the utility as their backup generator. And we're moving to that absolutely astonishing frontier of the interaction of virtual power plants, electric vehicles, solar energy, and stationary energy storage. Stuff that, when I entered the industry, was truly science fiction.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a fabulous ride. It's also going to be even more challenge. Now we got car dealers that we got to teach to tell the truth about how their cars interact with the utility. Good gracious, that's a challenge for you.
Yeah, and then probably 2 years from now, it's going to be a whole different explanation with more EV to grid and all that.
Yep, an EV to grid is going to be an absolute game changer. EVs are a game changer. And one of the big published fears is EVs are going to break the grid. No, they're going to help the grid. They're parked most of the time. If they're connected to the grid when they're parked, they have the ability to support it instead of break it. It's just colossally exciting, the technology we're moving into. And as we move into that technology, the skills and knowledge required of our industry professionals just continues to accelerate.
Yeah, I can kind of see a future where you have maybe 100 amp service, just for an example, including bidirectional electric vehicles. You might have 400 amps of inverters at your house, all controlled by electronics. You're exporting to the grid more than you're taking from the grid throughout the whole year, but there might be time of use charges that are compensating for that. And you're even helping the grid, perhaps even making money, especially if your car's parked there all day and you're working from home. And then you could be helping your neighbors and helping affect the quality of the power on the grid and smoothing things out. And, it's just like there's some of the biggest energy storage systems in the world that dwarf the amount of electric vehicles that are parked in just one city.
That's true. We look at multi megawatt systems, coming from a land of lead acid, these multi megawatt systems are just astonishing. On the NAPSEP energy storage installation professional, JTA, we were looking at people that had a range of residential experience to people that had utility scale experience. And the conversation of what was a large system, what constituted a large system, was quite laughable. Somebody said half a megawatt. Somebody else said 10 megawatt. Somebody else in the room said, well, I never work on anything less than 20 megawatt hours. I just about fell off my chair and kind of went, could I have your floor sweepings?
Yeah, and then with energy storage, it's complicated too, because it's not just the megawatts, it's the megawatt hours, and how do you define that? And I know the biggest one in the world, I believe, but it probably changes every day, is 3 gigawatt hours out at Moss Landing. And I know they're working on it. It's supposed to end up being 6 gigawatt hours. And then there's another one that's just right next to it on the same property that's also one of the top 10 biggest energy storage systems in the world. But then if you look at all the Teslas, Rivians, General Motors, even Cadillacs, there's a whole lot of gigawatt hours of those out there, and it dwarfs the stationary storage. In fact, even at my house, we have like 150 kilowatt hours sitting here plugged in right now without the ability to support the grid yet, which will change soon enough. Maybe not for these cars because they were built a certain time, but pretty soon I think that it's going to be the utilities and the EV manufacturers begging for us to go bidirectional, because that's the way that it's going to work on the grid, or they wouldn't be able to have as much business.
Oh, that's so true. I look at the ideal system being some stationary energy storage, because if the grid fails when you're not home and your major energy source is your vehicle, that's not going to help your fridge. It's not going to help the food in the freezer. So some stationary energy storage, 18, 20 kilowatt hours would be a great starting point. But then when you park that car, you go from 1 day storage to a week storage. And moreover, you go to the ability to go somewhere where there is utility power, because it's not out everywhere, and recharge it and bring it home. As an off-grid guy, the notion of being able to, I can't do it because I live on a remote island, but I know lots of people in Northern California off-grid that have roads. Being able to go to Costco and get a week's groceries and then pop over to a fast charger and bring home a week's electricity.
Yeah,
That's pretty magical for those dark winter months.
I know, huh? I'm going to go to the store and pick up some milk in about 100 kilowatt hours or 50 kilowatt hours.
Yeah, if those kilowatt hours cost me 50 cents a kilowatt hour, it's still a good deal. It's still an awfully good deal. And yeah, I'm in the same boat. I have two EVs. One of them's an orphan. It lives over in a parking lot on Vancouver Island. But the other one sits in my garage most of the time. It's charged with solar, but I have no way of using that car to augment my battery, to augment my energy storage system. And I'm sure you feel the same way. It's colossally frustrated
Yeah.
to look at a stranded resource like that.
Yeah. And we got to figure out the solution. And then also there's other weird laws too, where you can't share your energy with your neighbor in a lot of places, because it's sort of like the utility has the rights to have the monopoly. And so if you're selling electricity to your neighbor, or you got a little microgrid, you could get in trouble. So there's a lot of strange rules, and it's different in every different place too. So I know you're in Canada, I'm in California, and you're in British Columbia, and there's different states, different provinces. And so every place has its own rules, which are kind of impossible to keep track of when you're talking about all the different places.
Well, it is. And at least we have provincial utilities and provincial standards. They don't change. Some states have many different utilities with different rules. The whole issue of microgrids is a hugely changing landscape for us as well. California killed net metering recently, and it was a big blow to the industry. And many people think it was a death blow. I'm of the mind that I think it was an opportunity blow, because people will have to shift gears, and there will be pain. There will be people that are not able to shift those gears successfully in their industry. But those that can are going to have the ability to provide customers with multiple value streams for their energy investment and have much more economically viable systems than what you get for just wheeling back and forth with the utility at retail rates.
Yeah. And I was trying to think of like what would be the solution for that. And I really don't like big, huge, sudden changes. And so that's what that was when you were switching from what they called net metering 2 to net metering 3. It's this big, huge, sudden change. And what is it? They say that something like 15,000 people lost their jobs or some kind of crazy number like that. And so instead of a big sudden change, I remember how we had the California Solar Initiative and it was gradually stepping down. And so like once so many people signed up, then there was just like the price of the rebate went down a little bit. And I was even trying to think of what would be a fix for this. Maybe if they brought back the California Solar Initiative and then we had a rebate that just kind of gradually worked us into not getting credit for exporting instead of just doing this crazy thing all at once, which is just a disruption in a negative way. And it just, it's the solar coaster and it goes up more and it goes down. But when it goes down, it can go down hard and be kind of abrupt.
I totally agree. Rapid policy changes without industry buy-in almost always hurt. It's almost always bad for the consumer, bad for the industry, and good for whatever stakeholders have promoted it. And yeah, there would be great ways to transition to net metering 3. If you move the solar incentive to energy storage and the ability to export on demand, that would be a great transition. If you encouraged community microgrids, that would be a great transition. The problem with sharing your power with neighbors is ultimately the challenge of anti-island. We have anti-islanding in all of our grid-connected inverters for a darn good reason. We don't want to be pushing electricity both ways on power lines if they're service personnel that aren't aware which way the power is coming from. So we have a really good cause, a good reason for anti-islanding. But there's no reason that you can't anti-island a community or a group of connected homes.
Yeah.
But there definitely needs to be the technology in place that's not software driven, that's mechanically driven, that will continue to protect the line workers at all times.
And so you're on an island right now, right? That's where you live?
Yep.
And so could you do that with your neighbors and connect to them? And then if you're gone for a week, they can take advantage of it and things like that? Or maybe you're not even that close to your neighbors.
We could. I live on an island that's kind of the Wild West. We don't do rules and regulations very well here. It's not our style. So yes, I could connect a system to my neighbors and do power sharing with no problem.
I wonder if there's some law against that. Yeah, of course you wouldn't follow it. Like when I lived up in Haines, Alaska for a while, everybody's off grid, lead acid batteries and all that kind of stuff at this place called Mud Bay. And yeah, that's like if you told the building department to come, you're like, oh, I want to get this permitted, they would probably just laugh at you.
Well, I don't know that there's a law against it because there's not much controlling off grid. And essentially, it'd be a single off grid system. I power multiple buildings on my property from a single energy source. I've got a functional microgrid because I'm using an SMA Sunny Island based system. So I have arrays at various points of my property. If I had close enough neighbors, we'd be able to do power sharing. One of them might have great micro hydro potential that we could use in the winter, and I might have a big array. As you said, though, the challenge here is we live on large properties. So my nearest neighbor is almost a quarter of a mile away. That's a lot of copper.
Yeah, that is. Yep.
But in areas where there's smaller, where there's more dense communities, be them on grid or off grid, the whole idea of microgrids makes a ton of sense. I was just gone for a week with the ability to make 50 kilowatt hours a day, just sitting stranded in my arrays, basically. I generated enough for my native loads, my phantom loads, and it was like 2 kilowatt hours a day, and everything else was just sitting there twiddling its thumbs. Gosh, we could have kept the pottery kiln going while we're away.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, I mean, that's part of where we need to go. What you say about permits is interesting. So how did we do? How does that podcast go Did the content work?
Yeah, good. Okay. So should we end it now?
Yeah, I think we beat it up unless you want to switch topics and talk about some other stuff, which I'm happy to talk to you about.
Let's see. I think we covered a lot. I'm always interested in the stuff from back in the day, but I think we covered that. And we talked about that. I think we're pretty good. We can always do it again too if you want sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to. The topic that we really didn't touch on that's important and could actually almost be another podcast is the walking the walk part. It's so important that the people that sell us this equipment and the people that install this equipment have some skin in the game. Back when we had the likes of AE Solar, even Photocom, the people that ran those companies, they've lived with the stuff. They love playing with the stuff. That was one of the things that always distinguished Outback Power from some of their competitors and Trace before that, is those companies were made up of solar geeks. They went at midnight solar. They go home and they play with that junk in their free time. It's fun. They get a buzz on from messing with that stuff. And that's so hugely different than when it's just bean counters and corporate interests that don't actually love it. I know you come from that. Yeah, I like to play with it. I do this in my spare time. I can't imagine you don't have some sort of solar on your sailboat. I hope I'm not wrong about that.
Yeah, as far as the solar on the sailboat, it's sitting there, but we're actually too busy to hook it up. And then we just go out for a couple hours at a time. We were trying yesterday to think of what would happen if we went grid tie on the dock and tried to backfeed that little meter. And, pretty much the only electricity we do is for a float charge on our battery. And that's it.
Yeah, well, that's a nice little 10-watt module. I love the scale in our world where we range from microsystems. We see them here on Lasqueti, and you certainly see them in places like Africa and remote South America, where a 25-watt system absolutely is a game changer for people's lives. It brings them a cell phone charger. It brings them some light. LEDs have been game changers for rural electrification. So we have that, and we go to private residences that have 300 kilowatts of solar, and 8 or 10 Solarks or Schneider inverters hooked up. And, it's the range that makes a change in people's lives is so huge. And I love that about solar. I mean, here we're talking about your boat. A 20-watt panel would mean you didn't have to connect to shore power and you wouldn't have a dead battery ever. And at home, you'd probably need 15 kilowatts to support your loads.
Yeah, then you'd also be galvanically isolated from your neighbors, which could help prevent corrosion and things like that. If your neighbor does bad grounding on a boat, it could mess up, your prop could dissolve.
Yep. Hopefully you don't have an aluminum boat.
No, my brother does. He has a nice skiff up there in Alaska, but no, it's just an old fiberglass, classic plastic Ranger 33 sailboat.
Sounds like a lot of fun on Sunday.
I think it's 1974. Next time you're in the Bay Area, we'll make sure to take you out.
That'd be good. Gee, 1974. I moved to the island in 1972. So yeah, it's a pretty old boat. It's probably older than you.
No, I'm a 67 guy, so I've got it beat a little bit. But yeah, I guess it's 50. We should have had a 50th birthday for it yesterday. Next time we go out.
Hey, that's pretty good. You can't complain about that. I'm a 1940s guy, so I'm slowly turning into a dinosaur, but I'm in good company with the likes of Dave Katz and John Schaefer and Arthur Rudin.
Well, all that good off-grid living, I'm sure you got some vegetable gardens and you'll probably live longer than most people my age.
Hell, I'm going to be out in the vegetable garden in a few minutes. So
All right.
this was a lot of fun, Sean. And yeah, I'd love to do it again if we have more topics you'd like to talk about.
Yeah, sure. Great. Well, thanks so much, Ezra Auerbach. And let's let people know where they can find you. I know I see you on LinkedIn all the time. And any other places you want to have people look for you?
No, LinkedIn would be the place. I don't do any other social media.
And so we can put your LinkedIn link at the show notes for the podcast. And thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To find out more, go to solarsean.com and make sure to get yourself NABCEP certified and take Sean and Ezra's classes and get yourself PV Technical Sales certified or any NABCEP certification or the NABCEP Associate credential. Take care, Ezra.
Take care.
All right.
Talk to you later.